Welcome to the Public Sector Show by Tech Table. Super excited to have you both here. Peter, for those who don't know you, give us a quick intro.
Peter Loo, Chief Information Officer of Los Angeles County.
Fantastic. Hannes?
I'm Hannes Scheidegger. I'm the Chief Global Services Officer at Infotech. I joined Infotech 5.5 years ago. Prior to that, I spent 15 years as a public sector consultant and did a lot of work with Los Angeles County.
Which we're going to cover today, which is going to be great. So, Peter, for those who don't know you, don't know LA County, first give us the 30,000-foot overview.
Everybody knows that LA County is big, but what we just adopted a $46 billion budget and made up of 40 departments. Now, when I started with the county, there was only a little bit over 33 departments. So we're continuing to grow. And we are in a federated environment, decentralized, at least at this time. And so we have 40 departments, have 40 CIOs that I work with. I'm responsible for county direction, strategy and planning, and countywide IT. There is an internal services department that deals with the operations side that manages about a third of IT, and then the rest is out in our various departments.
That's fantastic. You're right. I think LA County is the largest county in America. That's the largest county. 40 departments?
40 departments.
40 departments, 40 different CIOs. Wow. We're going to unpack that today, which is great. We had met before this, and one of the stories that I really liked was the history of partnership between the two of you. Yeah. And I thought we could start with the Department of Health Services, you had mentioned the EA, and I thought, Peter, you could take us back to, was that the first engagement that the two of you had, or one of the first big ones?
These first big ones, yeah.
Okay, so take us back. How many years ago was that?
Man.
I started in 2009. I don't know when you joined the county.
2007. Okay. Yeah, I rejoined the county in 2007. I think it was around 2010, 11 time period. Yep. Was when DHS was implementing their EHR. So let me give you the kind of a little bit of the background on that. So prior to, they had a new CIO come in at the Department of Health Services from Florida actually, and joined the department. And the charge was, prior to his arrival, we run, just to give you a sense, the County Department of Health Services runs 5 hospitals, and they see about 2.5 million clients a year. They also run a long-term rehab center out in Rancho Los Amigos. And so every one of those 5 hospitals was running the same product for EHR, but implemented 5 different ways. As a department, it was very difficult. And so when this new CIO came on board, there was a need to really re-platform the EHR because of all the things that was happening with the healthcare industry, right? With affordable healthcare and everything else, there was a big push and the need to get really ramped up to support a system-wide view of things. And they partnered with Hannes' team to begin to look at from the front end, right? The solicitation, the requirements analysis, and putting it out, and then the implementation of the EHR. And there was this big need for a industry partner to work with DHS because it's a huge implementation, as you can imagine, across 5 hospitals, and that's where the partnership came up.
So, Hannes, take us back there to 2007 when I graduated high school and didn't know what a database or anything was, or an EHR, any that was back in 2007. Take us back there, like the early stages.
The very early stages was the desire to make something big happen and to get to an enterprise EHR solution. And the sentiment that was prevailing was that it had never been done before. There was a history of not being successful. There was still the looming shadow of a pretty bad implementation that happened even 10 years prior. Yeah. And so there were not many believers in this even being possible. And I think what happened is that a small group of true executive leaders in the county with industry partners said, no, we're going to make this happen. And we got together and committed ourselves to the cause, and as a result, developed a relationship and a governance model that kept the ball moving. And whenever we hit the snag, we found a solution so we could continue. Yeah. And that was a mindset that we put in place very early on at the strategy part, and then continued all the way through the implementation 5 or 6 years later, which, by the way, happened on schedule and within budget.
So you said a couple of things that were really great. True executive leadership, committed to the cause. Talk about the lessons of getting buy-in, because I think to be really effective in public sector, you need buy-in, you need leaders who believe you're going to hit snag. Talk about how you were able to build those relationships across so many different silos.
I think what really, because it starts with the governance and its steering committee, right? And having the right business leadership in each of the areas and each of the hospitals being on that group, right? So that partnership really worked out because the steering committee recognized the mandate, right, and the mission to really have this single platform that needs to be implemented across these 5 hospitals. That was the vision that really kept that true north, if you will, right, the North Star. And so using that as a North Star, as Hannes was recounting, as we went through this project and as we encountered implementation issues and everything else, we always focus back on this is the mission. It's not a question of whether we're going to change the mission, but how do we get there, right? And how do we do that? So it was part of the change management was that this is going to happen. We are going to work with you on the ground on how to actually make that happen. So it's not a question of if, right? And that was a really important point to make because there was no other option. It's a matter of how do we work together and resolve some of these differences between how things are done at the different hospitals, and so that we can come up with a common set of processes and procedures as a department across these 5 hospitals to do it. So that was a very important part of how this buy-in needs to happen because of the direction that it's top down, has to happen. Now we're going to try to get a buy-in, and how do we make this happen?
So everything you said, technology matters. People were like, Joe, you always say technology. No, the technology matters, but there's a lot of, what you said, change management, governance. These are not technology issues. Fundamentally, they're human issues, right? And getting the teams to buy in. And I love that you said you keep the mission in front of us, and it's not a question of if, we're going to get there. And it kind of makes me think of back in the day, Jeff Bezos, when he was running Amazon, would have an empty chair kind of to remind everybody of the end customer. And I just loved that because the end customer, we're serving people who are coming to the hospital. My very first professional job was a technical account manager at Yardi Systems. And I did not know anything. The first day I walk in, they're talking to me about SQL. I don't even know if I could spell it. And they sent me to San Francisco and I did some coding classes. And then soon I was like, it's kind of cool. I'm dropping these SQL packages in, I'm updating everything. And then the next thing my boss said, he was really great. Okay, you're gonna go on site and you're actually gonna learn that there are people behind all of this. And then that was a really fascinating lesson of actually going on site and implementing the software and understanding, oh, this is not a software issue. Actually, the executive team over here is disconnected from the end users. It was a really important lesson I always remembered that I was very curious, takes us to today. When you talked about the steering committees, here we are in the age of AI, right? And same thing, what lessons would you give to other CIOs around the country in making this actually effective? I
think what also made this effective was it started with the leadership, right? The leadership and the technologists were lockstep. It wasn't the technologists driving the technology and implementation. It was this is a business imperative. And this is how technology is required to enable us to get and meet that imperative, right? So that message was very clear. The other thing I think that was also very important is that the steering committee was empowered, right? So they were just not a steering committee to steer things. They were also required and were empowered to facilitate and to drive the implementation, right? And that's part of building up that buy-in and that ownership you're talking about, right? Because they're at the table, they're helping solve these differences and issues, and now they're also owning it and helping drive that. That is so important. Right. Some of the committees I've attended, it is this committee for committee's sake, right? But this was really an empowered steering committee with the right leaders that were actually part of the solutioning and then also driving the change, right? Not just the technology, the adoption of the technology, along with the organizational change that's required for successful implementation.
He nailed it right there.
Sorry.
So
we had a guiding principle that we would move the decisions as far down in the organizations as we could, so that the decisions would be made by the people who actually use the system or provided patient care. And I think, to me, that's another parallel to AI. We can't dictate this top, right? We need to create a structure and a system where the people who actually do the work can figure out how they can best leverage these new technologies. And so those are parallels. It's the empowerment and then providing the guidelines and the direction and make sure it's safe, right?
Yeah. So the reason I really like this topic a lot was, so when I hear empowerment, I think resources. Like I can't assign my wife a task and not give her the appropriate tools, money, whatever it is that she needs to actually do the task. But I was thinking in the age of AI, and I talked to a lot of CIOs where AI came out first, and then there was a rush for what we'll call governance one. And then behind the scenes, I was like, so do you use anything? And this is maybe 2 years ago at this point, 18 months ago. And behind the scenes, I was like, it almost seems like you need more of guidelines before the rush to governance. But I understood the dynamic because I said, hey, your boss, they're asking you right now, right? And they're like, yeah, the city manager, the county CEO.
So guidelines is important, but we are also very careful, particularly with large projects and transformative projects, and particularly the ones that I bring to it is the principles. Because once you start getting into guidelines, some technologies and so forth can get so prescriptive. That this is how it's going to be done. It significantly constrains you, right? So when we established, for example, the AI governance in our county, we worked with the GovAI Collaborative, understand what's out there so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and collaborate with our partners across the state. Is that it was really important that we approach governance as an enabler of the responsible use of AI. Not necessarily the checks and controls. You fill out this form and when you go through this process, a review cycle and everything else. So it needs to be viewed when you start establishing governance, especially for the county like ours, where governance is so important because it's so federated. We have to really understand that it has to be done in the context of how do we enable the responsible use of technology and AI and protect our assets and still be able to deliver the kind of value we need to that AI and technology to deliver for our departments and the missions.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned GovAI. Shout out to Khalid Takfeh, been on the podcast several times. Randomly went to a Dodger game with him too. But yeah, I think GovAI, a great example. I think not so much now, but early on it was like, hey, where do I start? And I'm like, you should just go to GovAI. There's templates, resources, other things like that. Hannes, I did want to jump to you. Could you talk a little bit about how Infotech partners, 40 departments, 40 different CIOs, you also have to get buy-in, right? You talk about how Infotech helps folks get the buy-in to really make impact.
So first and foremost, we want to provide value to our members and clients. And we do that by providing knowledge, templates, and approaches that are immediately implementable. And so when we work with members, we obviously understand the need or the problem, and then we help solution, and we're there during the implementation of the solution.
But I was going to add to that was that's really important, right? Because where we see particularly partners like Infotech that are helpful for the county is that there are gaps within our resources that are required and knowledge that are required to deliver some of this stuff. Less so the subject matter expertise because we have the subject matter experts, but the programmatic side of implementing large, complex systems, right? How do we do the change management? How do we do that? What does that look like? Those actionable templates and best practices are really important to help inform us on how we can leverage that because this is new to us. We've never done and replaced 5 hospital systems at the same time, for example, right? How do we go about doing that? And what are the best practices that we could infuse into the project to help us get there, right? And that's where the partnership and the expertise comes in to help.
So when you sign up for Infotech, they don't just give you a bunch of playbooks and then leave you.
No, we do these things with you and not to you, right? And we do it in a way that the knowledge and the expertise stays and sticks with you, right? Because we want to systematically improve your IT organization. And we want to make sure that if you pick one of the 50 processes and you implement an Infotech playbook, that you end up at a higher level of maturity, function more efficiently, and go to the next process that you need to make that same step up. That's our philosophy.
That's great. So, Hannes, you have the added advantage of working with a lot of different customers all around. I was going to say the US, but at this point, I think you were just in Sydney. So maybe the world, the globe. With kind of that lens, what have you seen from Peter Loo's team and LA County that are some best practices that other CIOs and other counties and local governments, even state agencies, can take back?
So I think 2 aspects. One is at the kind of guidelines and policy side, right? Where it is your role to establish policies that are then followed by all the 40 departments so that over time you kind of converge on similar technologies or similar ways to apply technology. So I think that's one area where there's a constant struggle because the more federated you are, the more there's a tendency to diverge and not converge. I think the second part is to really bring people together on a common approach, solution, whatnot, right? And one example that comes to mind is the data center consolidation here at the county, which was, it was a bit of an uphill battle, right? Initially, but it was a mandate by the Board of Supervisors, and it was your office who implemented that mandate, again, with facilitation and partnership and managing some very divergent viewpoints at times.
Okay, so let's take the data center consolidation as an example.
Yeah.
That's a pretty common one. You probably have a wide spectrum of leaders who are involved in the decision making. There are other leaders across the US who will probably still go through a data center consolidation. Yeah, Hannes, when CIOs come to Infotech and, hey, we've got this complex problem, we want to consolidate this data center example, what does that look like? How do you kick off that engagement? Give us a little more. You said needs, looking at the problem, your solutioning. Go a step deeper for us.
We can do this at different levels. We can look at the problem and then go find what we call a blueprint and say the how-to guide to do it. And you can take that and say, good, I'll go do it on my own. You can then do that as a guided implementation where you have analyst calls along the way, and these are checkpoints where you have a partner who makes sure you're doing it right. You can then do it as a workshop, right? Where we come to you, we work together over a period of time, and we drive to a solution. That could be for a data center strategy or for requirements gathering or a small discrete piece of one of those bigger journeys. Or you can do consulting where we're there with you through the entire process. So our approach is very flexible, but it is very consistent in what playbook we follow and how we implement it, and it's always outcome focused. Yeah. We're not just there to spend time and figure things out. We have a plan when we show up.
We can add a little bit of a customer's perspective to that. We chose the consulting approach just because of this particular topic, right? We needed a consultant, a partner to help us build the why. Why are we consolidating 42? We have 42 data centers. Many of them were closets and rooms and offices. They were not really data centers, but they were used as data centers, right? So what is the why? Why are we doing this? We were at the point, the county was at a critical point where we had to decide whether we build our data center, which would require we have the space, we would have to have substantial capital investment to do that. Or at that time, maybe we need to look at alternative ways on how we can provide data center services in a much more managed way and a lower cost way. So we built that business case, and it became very apparent to us is we built it around risk. What would happen if we don't do this, right? We did a full inventory with Infotech's help, but we went out and we did this survey of all the 42 data centers. We went took pictures with the conditions of some of these data centers. And when we sat down with our board members to explain why we needed to do this, we had a good board sponsor and said, here's the risk if we don't do this. When they start seeing the conditions of some of our data centers and why and what and whatnot, it became now an imperative, right? And so it was a risk mandated imperative for us to do this. It still took us close to about 4 years, but now we don't have those 42 data centers running in closets and in office spaces anymore. And now we have full T5 data center that is knock on wood, earthquake proof, and now we're much more resilient than we were ever with, and the risks have dramatically been reduced.
So you said pictures. Did you show up with a stack of photos to sell the business case?
Yeah, we had slides. There were data centers, open windows, refrigerators in there. Yeah, under desks. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. So again, I'm thinking about the question. You've got this business case you want to make. Yeah. Again, not a technology thing, but what advice would you give on either presenting, positioning, structuring? Like, how should CIOs, if they want to go, you said you had a sponsor, which is great. Probably the sponsor didn't happen overnight, right? Yeah. There had to be a relationship there. Talk about how you can build those relationships with the sponsors that you need so that folks just understand, hey, this isn't just this kind of vague risk, but so that folks can really understand that what's the right word for this? It would almost be like when you communicate to the technical team, there's certain language there that they would understand, but oftentimes it gets lost in translation when you have to communicate to the executive team. What advice would you give communicating to the executive team?
For the executive team, is the language of business. And when you talk to executives, they care about value. And what does that value translate to the different things that are important to them? For the Board of Supervisors and accounting, it's our services to our constituents, right? How do we provide a better value to the services that we need. And many times, oftentimes also, many of the recipients of our services are safety net services where they don't have any other place to go. So how do we get proper accessibility to these services and so forth, bridging digital device and gaps, reaching out and be able to enable the people, the frontline workers that work with these folks, the information and the systems and the technology they need to do to better deliver those services. That's one area, right? That's what value means to us in public sector and the county. The other one that they're also very mindful of is risk. You balance value with risk. If there are things that are at risk for the county that jeopardizes the way that we deliver our services and so forth, how do we mitigate those risks? And how do we address those risks? So if you talk to it in those terms, those business terms, I think it resonates there. And that's how you build that sponsorship and the relationship. The other thing that we also do quite a bit of is listening to them and understanding what their priorities are. We have 5 board members, right? And each one of them have their own set of priorities. Some of them are the same and some of them are a little bit different based on the communities they represent. Listening to them and understanding what those pain points are, what are the things that are most important for them, and then making sure that when we bring forth and develop initiatives, is that that's the why we're doing this. And in connecting those are very important things that we do out of our office.
I love that. So I heard talk the language of business. Yeah.
Just an addition in the use of partnerships. I think you and your predecessor, you've been very mindful and savvy in using partners for certain pieces of the message to support it with. We had somebody on the team who did a data center consolidation in Hawaii, or you put the consultant in the front seat when otherwise it's just getting political for the political reason, right? Yeah. So I think the good use of partnerships where we're all aligned on where we want to go, but sometimes you have to have somebody else say it because it just comes across differently. Yeah. And I think you've used that really well over the years.
Yeah. The talk in business terms. I love what you added about how you communicate the value of the county. I think sometimes that actually gets missed. What does the value actually mean to you in the county? I love the value and risk balance is really good. And then the ability to, you mentioned the 5 board members. So I think understanding the board members, even in Santa Barbara County, we have a local, it's called News Hawk. I'm usually most curious around, hey, we're going to pass this budget. And then you get to hear the folks talk about, and then which departments are like bullish on AI. Yeah. And so you can kind of hear, oh, okay, this is what they care about. That makes sense. And so you get the different priorities. Some overlap, some don't. But Hannes, so you also talk about the consultant coming in. Have you ever been in that position where you were in the front seat?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, tell us more.
We had one in the data consolidation process. There was a lot of contention around just certain elements of control in the governance process. And we had one meeting where I think the vast majority of the county CIOs were all in one room. And we had thought that we had agreed on the final roles and responsibilities. And it turned out in the meeting that was not the case. And it was one of the more contentious meetings of my career. And I was front and center, just taking the shots, watching the firework. But we worked through it, right? It was important. And I think it would have been, it could have had a different outcome or a longer story to it had this been the county CIO kind of as a party in there. Yeah. I was not partial to anything. I was just there to do the right thing. Yeah. And so that happens. And that's why you sometimes need a third party in the mix.
Specifically, when you move from 42 data centers to a consolidated set of data centers, you really need, a lot of it is about perceived control. Yeah. So a lot of the discussions that we had to walk through those issues was like, what parts do you really want to control? Do you want to control the utility? Or do you want to control where it makes sense and where it matters at the application level and at the data level? And yes, and the answer was, yeah, generally that's true. Then let's take out all that other stuff off your plate so that you don't have to worry about it, so they can do more of that. But what are the things now to challenge our internal services department was, what are the things that needs to be there in the transparency and the cost transparency and everything about that you would require to provide to the departments that are going to be consuming this utility, this services. So a lot of these consulting work that we do and a lot of the work that we do out of the office of the CIO is kind of like bridging those conversations, right? And facilitating it so that we can begin to then say, this is how we would want to do it and this is how we're going to proceed forward.
So I like what you last said about bridging the conversations. I think that's really great. It's one of those phrases that sounds really easy to do. Leadership is very hard. Communication is very hard with lots of different organizations, folks. Craig Groeschel, he say this a lot, but he'll say when the leader gets better, everyone gets better. And I think so much of really everything rests and falls on the leadership. And so I love the bridging the conversations. That's another really great phrase. I'm going to go steal that, and I should say borrow it and give that over to some CIOs that I know. But I did want to transition. I love the partnership, this long-term partnership that you have with Hannes, with Infotech. I think one of the benefits of long-term partnerships that often doesn't get talked about a lot is the compounding effect of trust and your ability to move faster because you have that trust. And I recently recorded an interview with Tim Gluzzi, the state CIO of Nevada. He was recounting last year about the largest ransomware attack in state history. I actually recorded an episode the day before that happened with Tim and Alan Fuller at the state of Utah and Bill at the state of Washington.
Yeah. And
so the four of us, we have this conversation, this podcast. And the next day I get an email. They're like, do not release this episode yet. It's just all caps, red, emergency, emoji, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So then eventually I released the episode. And so following that, almost a year later, we have Tim back on the show and with Mark Helsbush from Infotech, recounting how Infotech really showed up, not just as a vendor, but as a partner. Yeah. And we actually recounted some of those really intense moments. And I'd love to hear from you first on, I think, generally what you look for in the difference between a vendor and a partner.
Certainly, the more obvious things is a partner is long-term, right? And that long-term is not just because of just the time that you guys work together, but that duration also allows the partner to really understand the county and our pain points and our challenges and the things, and more importantly, our strategies and what we're trying to accomplish. That partnership and that trust is really important because of the longevity of that relationship. New partners that come on board, we have new vendors and new partners that we begin to build those partnerships is one, coming into the door, demonstrating that you're not selling a product or service, but more, here's how we're going to work with you to help address this particular initiative and execute on some of these things. Partnerships happens in different levels of engagement. And so you have to almost kind of be sustained. And then if you're new, be able to really come in with a understanding of where we are and what we are challenged with and what we're trying to accomplish. And then truly partner with us because no project will go as planned, right? Adjustments need to be made. Things have to be done. We try to, being county public sector, we have a statement of work, deliverables, and tasks, and so forth. When we get into a plan, reality hits. Things need to be adjusted, plans need to be adjusted, deliverables need to be reconfigured, and so forth. So that partnership is how many change orders do you put into us, and how do we work with you to accommodate some of these adjustments that we know are inherent in any large complex projects without having to say, oh, that's change order number 26, and this is what it means, and this is what. So what does that partnership look like, and how do you execute it? That's what builds trust, right? And that's what builds commitment and true partnership.
Oh, there was so many good things you said right there. I think you nailed it. First, you don't start where you are when you've had that time to build that relationship. Yeah. So you got to start different, you said different levels, right? I love that. So you start, I think, how do you build that trust? You show up, you listen, exactly, challenges, pain points. And then over time, when, like you said, no project ever goes according to, it's just kind of fantasy land to think everything just goes perfectly. Yeah. But you're showing up, you're probably having a good attitude, you're probably willing to do inconvenient, you're probably willing to take calls at inconvenient hours, all the kind of things that build trust. So, but Hannes, I'd love to hear from you as you started to make that jump. Was there a specific project where you were like, hey, now I feel like we're really having that really strong partnership?
Yes, one specific moment comes to mind when I was asked to meet with the CIOs, Rich Sanchez, then at the time, and Dean Logan, the head of the department, the registrar, a recorder, and county clerk, and they said, we want to build a new voting system, and we need you to do what you did for DHS. That was the extent of the initial ask. And to me, that is... It's that expression of we want to do something impossible that's never been done before, and we are asking you to be the partner through this. And I think what it shows is there's a professional respect, which I think would add to your list. There is a belief that we have a partner who will commit to the cause and kind of stick it out with you. And then I think there's the element of being honest, right? I've walked away from projects or asks, right? When you think you cannot do it or the time has come where you no longer add value. I think that all goes into that.
That is really important, right? Because it helps build credibility, right? Commitment to the cause and know when the value is not there. And to have those honest conversations with your clients. Say, you know what? I know we're trying to do this. I understand I'm committed to your mission, but maybe we need to do a reset, right? And be able to have those frank, candid conversations and know when to do that. The other thing that Hannes mentioned, and he's done this multiple times in our partnership with a different project that we worked on, if he would be sitting next to me like this in front of the folks that would be the issues and work with us, right? Be the lightning rod for all of the concerns and the feedback and so forth. And how do we work together, right? Either with the messaging and then in the collaboration to work right in the trenches to execute these projects. That's what commitment means, right? And it has its ups and downs. Sometimes you take more heat than you need to, but you just sit there and just walk through it, right? And that's what builds that trust in that relationship.
I love the frank and I'm laughing because Dominic DeLulio, he's been on the podcast before in Broward County, and he's an avid listener. He messages me and goes, "Do you know how many times you say love it on a podcast?" Every time I say it now, I just can't stop thinking about it. It cracks me up. I'm like, you listen to this podcast too much. But the frank, candid conversations, I think that's where you really build in that trust that you're willing to have those hard. It doesn't happen at first, but whether it's in marriage or in business, being able to have those honest conversations is when things actually get stronger. I coach high school basketball. Every year on the JV team, you get the best freshmen go up to JV, and then every year you lose most of your team to varsity. So it's constantly getting reloaded. And what's interesting is at the beginning of the season with the new players, there isn't that trust, there isn't that buy-in. And then I started noticing something. We would go on the van rides, we'd go to away games, and then soon we stop at Chick-fil-A or the kids love Cane's, and you'd stop. And suddenly you could see the team coming together, and I was like, oh, interesting. We run the same plays, but now there's buy-in, now there's trust. The turnovers go down, there's less miscommunication. You can start to have those conversations and even start to push, hey, I noticed that here's where you are right now, but here's where I actually think you could be in the future, which I think is an important part of leadership, but being able to have those honest conversations. And I know it can be uncomfortable because there are different personalities. My wife, she would probably run away. I'm like, hey, we should have a Jamie, and she's gone. And so I'm very different. If like Hannes wants to get hyped up on me, for example, I would probably get hyped up too, like in a good way, just because I'm into sports and all that kind of stuff. But and everyone's a little bit different. But I love regardless of how you communicate, that at some point there'll need to be a conversation that needs to be honest. Hey, here's where we're at. Here are the blockers. This is a red flag. How can we just what does it take to move fast? I just love the language. Love the language there. So as we start to turn the corner on the podcast, we wrap this up. I'd love to hear from you, Peter, and then Hannes. What's one piece of advice that you would leave the audience with of, I really want this partnership, but it takes a while to get to. Where should I start? What should I look for? Maybe there are a lot of up and coming new CIOs in public sector. What piece of advice would you give to them? Building partnerships and being an effective CIO in public sector.
Care for the county's mission. Care for the public sector mission that you're in, right? I'm doing public sector, been doing it for over 30 years because I love it, right? You can see the impact that you make. Even though we're working on IT and technology, you can see the impact you make directly in the services that are being enabled by what you're. That's what excites me. That what keeps me going. The other thing in public sector especially, what also gets me excited is that oftentimes there is this gap between what the leaders wants to accomplish and the people that needs to be part and understand that. That's why in our projects and major initiatives, let's make sure we understand why we are doing this, right? So because as we go through challenges, as challenges will always come up in large initiatives, in implementing strategies, we can always go back, remember why we're doing this and how do we then get there and so forth. And so that helps us anchor it and being able to bridge that gap between the executive vision and be able to translate that in terms of here are the things that could enable us achieving that vision. That was really important. And that's what I think a role of a CIO is very important to be that.
Love that. You ever read Start With Why by Simon Sinek?
Yeah.
Probably. One of those very easy phrases, right? But what I love is when you start getting into projects start to become tough, things start happening, going back up to that why level.
Yeah.
So crucial.
Yeah.
So crucial. I love that.
Yeah.
I said it again.
So what's really cool is when you start seeing steering committee members saying the same thing, right? Remember why we're doing this, right? And let's focus on let's figuring out how to get there, right? Then it's starting to kind of propagate. So it's really important for us to anchor that mission.
Fantastic. Hannes?
3 things I would point out. So the first one you mentioned, it's commitment to the cause.
Yeah.
You can't have a partnership if not both partners are committed to the greater good, the why. The second one is, as a partner with public sector organizations, you have to be patient and persistent. It takes time, right? And there's often things that happen that you wonder why, and you have to understand, and there's usually a reason or a process or something. And the third point, I think, is make sure that we work together as we have a contractual relationships, right? And that alone is sometimes not easy to actually get to. But if we go through then the engagement as an us versus them, it's usually not a good ending. So it is what it is, what we've contracted for, but now we have to do the project and we're committed to do that together. And I think that's what then allows us to offer all these other things to happen. And that's how you build the partnership and you start to navigate challenges together because you're committed to the cause, you have the right patience and understanding for the process, and you really do it together.
I love that. With that, thank you for coming on the Public Sector Show by Tech Tables.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having me.